Imagine, right, just imagine signing away the next 10 years of your life to play, honestly, one of the most beloved, well, definitely one of the most intricately analyzed characters in modern literature.
Oh, yeah, completely.
And your reward for achieving this massive artistic pinnacle is just an inbox full of death threats.
Yeah.
And they're from the exact people who claim to love the story the most.
Right. It's wild. It is the ultimate double-edged sword of modern pop culture. I mean, you get handed the keys to the kingdom, but then you quickly realize the castle is, like, under siege.
Yeah, under siege from, what, 5 different ideological factions?
Exactly. And none of them even agree on what the castle should look like in the first place.
Oh, true. Welcome to today's deep dive, everyone. We are looking at the casting of Severus Snape for the upcoming decade-long HBO Harry Potter series.
Yeah.
And, you know, we're looking at a landscape that is just no longer about entertainment.
Not at all.
Like, a casting announcement isn't just a press release anymore. It is an absolute minefield.
Yeah, a little minefield, yeah.
So to understand how these minefields are armed and, frankly, dead, we are unpacking a really fascinating stack of material today. Our grounding text for you today is an excerpt from a YouTube commentary video by a channel called Blabbering Collector.
Right.
And this video is basically analyzing a very revealing interview published in The Time, written by Jonathan Dean, featuring the actor Paapa Essiedu.
And what becomes immediately apparent, right, when you cross-reference Essiedu's interview with the YouTuber's real-time reaction, is that we aren't just looking at an actor getting a job here.
No, definitely not.
We're looking at this profound, honestly, almost uncomfortable diagnostic test of modern fandom. Like, this single source exposes the architecture of how we debate adaptation, the mechanics of representation, and really what happens when deeply personal politics just violently collide with massive intellectual property.
Yeah. So for you listening, think of this deep dive as a sort of masterclass in the mechanics of modern cultural controversy. Like, have you ever wondered why, within minutes, a simple entertainment update just instantly fractures into these intense, irreconcilable debates about race, gender politics, meritocracy?
It happens so fast now.
Right. You are getting a front row seat to that exact fragmentation today. Okay, let's unpack this, starting with the sheer staggering scale of what Paapa Essiedu has actually signed up for.
Yeah, the scale is something I don't think the average viewer fully conceptualizes. Like, Essiedu is taking on Severus, right? A character he very accurately describes as morally complex.
Extremely complex.
Yet it's the timeline that shifts this from a standard act gig into, like, an era-defining life choice. Yeah. He notes in the interview that this role will take 10 years to complete.
10 years.
10 years. He mentions, with this kind of nervous reality check, that he will be 45 by the time he finished the project.
He even says, I could have children by the end of this.
Right.
And he totally acknowledges that his life is going to change in a massive, irreversible way. And he just has to surrender. I mean, signing away a decade of your life to a single character that is an entire era of human development.
It really is. It dictates everything.
Everything. Your schedule, your public persona, your physical appearance, diet, where you live. You aren't just playing a character. You are entering a symbiotic relationship with an entity that will likely outshine your own name for the rest of your life.
Yeah, and what's fascinating here is what that level of commitment requires psychologically. To tether your identity to a fictional wizard for a decade, you know, that requires an incredibly deep personal anchor to the material.
Yeah.
And the source details Essiedu's childhood connection to this text, which provides exactly that anchor. It's actually a very poignant origin story.
It really is. He talks about how during his childhood, his mother couldn't afford a babysitter during the school holidays.
Yeah.
So her socioeconomic solution was to take him to the local public library and basically leave him there to read.
Right. A safe place.
Exactly. And that library is where he discovered the Harry Potter. He describes them as pure escapism when other things were less easy for him.
That changes the dynamic of his casting completely, doesn't it?
Oh, totally.
The library acted as a safe haven. It's like a socioeconomic necessity turned into a creative awake. He isn't approaching this text as, you know, a Hollywood actor looking for a blockbuster paycheck.
No, not at all.
He is approaching it as a former vulnerable kid who used this specific world to survive his reality. But, and this is where it gets crazy, the source immediately drops a crucial, fascinating detail right after establishing this deep literary.
Oh, yeah.
Essiedu has never seen the Harry Potter films.
Which I have to admit blew my mind initially.
Really? Same.
How do you exist in British culture for the last 20 years and actively avoid seeing Alan Rickman play Snape?
It requires active evasion. You'd have to try really hard. But the YouTube commentator, Blabbering Collector, actually points this out as a massive positive.
Yet surprisingly.
The commentator notes that because Essiedu hasn't seen the movies, he won't be tempted to copy Alan Rickman's iconic, definitively etched performance. He is working entirely from a blank.
It makes me think of an analogy, actually. Let's say you have a highly skilled musician being asked to perform a cover of a legendary song, something that has been played on the radio a billion times.
Okay, yeah.
But this musician has intentionally never listened to the most famous recorded version. They've never heard the specific vocal inflection, the tempo, the iconic guitar solo that everyone else associates on.
Right, they're just looking at the notes.
Exactly. It forces them into a completely original interpretation based strictly on the raw sheet, which in this case is the book.
I'd actually push back a little on the idea that a blank slate is inherently purely beneficial, though.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, it's a massive risk. Yes, it prevents mimicry, and obviously mimicry rarely results in brilliant act, but it also forces a reliance purely on the text. And if we look at the text of Harry Potter, Snape is written with an incredible amount of internal bias.
Oh, because of Harry's perspective.
Exactly. We view him through the eyes of Harry, who despises. Book Snape is often pettier, crueler, and honestly more unhinged than the smooth, tragic, velvet-voiced anti-hero Alan Rickman.
That's true. Book Snape yells a lot more.
He really does. So by relying only on the sheet music, Essiedu might arrive at a much harsher, perhaps less instantly lovable interpretation of the character.
That is a brilliant point. He has to discover the moral complexity of Snape through his own artistic lens, completely unsoftened by the nostalgia of the films.
Right.
But here's the friction, right? While Essiedu's lack of exposure to the films gives him this pure blank slate creatively, the fans and the internet at large do absolutely not have a blank slate.
No, very much the opposite.
They have a very specific, deeply entrenched visual expectation of what Severus Snape is supposed to look like. And that expectation leads us directly into the primary controversy analyzed in our source.
Because the transition from page to screen is never just about character motivation or internal psychology,
No, it's so visual.
It is deeply, inextricably tied to visual permanence. Fans engage in a process of cognitive mapping when they read a book. They build a face, a voice, a silhouette in their minds.
Yeah, they cast the movie in their head.
Exactly. And when an adaptation challenges that cognitive map, it can trigger a profound sense of cognitive dissonance.
And that dissonance is the core argument of the YouTube commentator here. The commentator's primary pushback is extremely direct. Paapa Essiedu is a black actor playing a character that was written as white, with specific descriptions of sallow skin and straight, greasy black hair.
Right.
The commentator insists that Essiedu, and I'm quoting from the transcript here, doesn't physically make the characteristics whatsoever. The commentator even suggests an alternative, saying the studio should make this man Kingsley, referring to Kingsley Shacklebolt, a character who is canonically black in the original text.
The commentator doesn't start at aesthetic critique, though. They escalate to an analysis of the casting mechanism itself.
Right, the how and why of it.
Yeah. The argument presented in the video is that Essiedu did not get this job purely on his acting talent. The commentator explicitly states that HBO needed to race swap a major character, claiming that this casting is the direct result of EI, diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yeah, so the systemic argument.
Yes. The thesis is that because Essiedu does not fit the physical description in the literature, his hiring must be an act of institutional engineering rather than artistic.
Now, let's contrast that directly with what Essiedu himself says in the interview, because the gap between these two realities is just vast. Essiedu explicitly asserts, look, at the end of the day, I got this job on the merit of my talent. We are looking at a fundamental clash of worldviews here.
We really are.
Essiedu possesses a firm belief in his own merit, his decade of stage and screen work, and his hard-earned capability, while the commentator possesses a firm belief that modern studio casting is driven by institutional quotas and ideological agendas that override artistic fit.
If we break down the mechanics of this debate, we are looking at literal, physical, text-to-screen adaptation versus talent-bind casting.
Okay. Break that down.
Let's look at how casting actually works versus how it is perceived. Historically, casting calls for a character like Snape would explicitly ask for a white male.
Right.
But modern casting departments, often influenced by the ethos of DEI, will frequently remove the racial requirement from the casting break. This opens the audition to all ethnicities to widen the talent. They are casting for the
But from the commentator's perspective, right, if a character has been illustrated and filmed as white for 25 years, opening that net and ultimately casting a black actor doesn't feel like finding the best S.
Right.
It feels like a targeted zero-sum replacement.
Exact. For a certain segment of the fandom, the physical description of a character in a book is an immovable, intrinsic part of that character's identity. To alter it is viewed as a violation of the sacred text.
Wow, yeah. Sacred text is a good way to put it.
On the other side of the philosophy, the physical description is entirely secondary to the emotional and psychological weight form.
I want you, the listener, to really think about this for a sec. How do we, as an audience, weigh the physical description of a character against the essence of their personality?
Tough question.
Is a character's race or their nose shape or their hair texture intrinsic to their fictional identity? Or is there moral complexity, that deep internal psychology that Essiedu is trying to tap into the actual core of the role?
It is a question every adaptation has to answer. But what the source material shows us next is that this debate over casting philosophy did not remain confined to polite theoretical critiques about cognitive mapping.
No, it got really ugly.
It escalated rapidly into severe personal attacks, revealing a much darker systemic issue in online engagement.
Yeah, the Jonathan Bean interview reveals a really grim reality. Essiedu shares that since the casting was announced, he has received targeted racist abuse and actual death threats sent directly to him.
Which is horrifying.
It is. He quotes the vitriol directly, saying people have messaged him things like, "Quit or I'll murder you, and I'm going to come to your house and kill you."
It is a staggering level of hostility directed at a human being for simply signing an employment contract for a television show.
That's just a TV show.
But what is deeply revealing is how Essiedu processes this abuse. He admits he'd be lying if he said it didn't affect him emotionally. I mean, he's human.
Of course.
But he claims he uses this as fuel. He says it makes him more passionate about standing his ground and making the character his own, specifically so that kids who look like him can imagine themselves at Hogwarts on broomstick and see themselves represented in the highest echelons of that world.
Now, the YouTube commentator's reaction to this specific part of the interview is incredibly multi-layered, and we really need to break it down piece by piece because it is a masterclass in modern digital rhetoric.
It really is.
First, the commentator explicitly condemns the violence. They state clearly that nobody should be violent to anybody for doing a job, and that death threats are completely unacceptable.
But immediately after establishing that baseline of condemnation, the commentator pivots to demanding receipts.
Right.
They say, if he's getting death threats, put them out, right? It's the same thing as anyone making any type of accusation.
Wow.
The underlying accusation here is that Essiedu might be exaggerating or entirely fabricating the threat, victimizing himself to deflect from the valid critique.
I find this dynamic so fascinating because the commentator acknowledges in another breath, listen, there are unhinged people on the internet. I get really unhinged comments, too, in my DMs.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's this profound irony here, right? The commentator freely acknowledges that the internet is full of unhinged people who send terrible, abusive things, yet simultaneously doubts the actor's firsthand account of receiving exactly that type of vitriol. Why do we do this? Why is the immediate reaction to someone claiming trauma to demand forensic proof?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we can understand this through the lens of what sociologists call weaponized skepticism, or really the gamification of trauma.
Weaponized skepticism. That's a strong term.
It is, but it fit. We have reached a point in digital the pic or it didn't happen culture where emotional or psychological claims made by public figures are immediately treated as strategic maneuvers rather than experience.
Interesting.
The assumption of bad faith is just the default setting now.
It's the algorithm economy at work.
Exact. In the algorithm economy, debunking a claim or exposing it drives significantly higher engagement, watch time, and ad revenue than simply offering empathy.
Because outrage clicks better than sympathy.
100. The commentator assumes the actor is weaponizing victimhood as a shield against critique, which completely bypasses the biological reality that receiving a message saying I'm going to kill you triggers a genuine physiological stress response, regardless of your profession or how much money.
And the commentator's critique doesn't stop at the demand for receipts either. They zero in on a specific phrase Essiedu uses. When discussing the threats and the pressure, Essiedu says, many people put their lives on the line in their work.
Yeah, that part got a huge reaction.
It did. The commentator actively mocks this phrasing, contrasting Hollywood actors making premium television shows with actual first responders, firefighters, police officers, and the army. They ask, what are we doing here? Pointing out the perceived absurdity and self-importance of an actor claiming to put their life on the line.
It's a clash of literal versus emotional language, really. Essiedu is likely speaking metaphorically, right?
Yeah.
About dedicating his life's energy to his art and enduring psychological warfare to do so.
Right, the emotional toll.
Exactly. But the commentator is holding him to the literal definition of physical mortal peril. But the most significant ideological clash in this section comes when the commentator pushes back hard on Essiedu's argument about representation.
Yes. This is where the source really highlights two completely different wavelengths. When Essiedu talks about black kids needing to see themselves represented at Hogwarts, the commentator genuinely asks, did he read the Harry Potter book? And they point out that black children were already at Hogwarts in the original text. They specifically name Lee Jordan and Dean Thomas, even calling Dean Thomas an absolute Chad.
We are seeing conflicting definitions of the word representation playing out in real time here.
How so?
Well, the commentator operates on a definition of demographic presence. They feel that because secondary canonical characters like Dean Thomas and Lee Jordan exist in the lore, the need for representation has been fulfilled by the author.
Like a box has been checked.
Right. The text provided it, therefore altering a major character to achieve it is unnecessary and invalid.
But Essiedu is coming at it from a totally different angle.
Yeah.
He isn't talking about demographic presence in the background. He is focusing on narrative weight.
Yeah, big difference.
Seeing someone who looks like you doing Quidditch commentary for 3 pages is fundamentally different from seeing someone who looks like you holding the emotional center, the agonizing moral crux of a 10-year cinematic epic.
It perfectly highlights how the metric for what constitutes good or sufficient representation is entirely subjective. For one side, it is about adhering strictly to the original architectural blueprints of the world.
Yeah.
For the other side, it is about expanding the aspirational boundaries and emotional real estate for a new generation of viewers.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Essiedu's desire to stand his ground, to endure this digital backlash, to provide that heavy narrative representation, it doesn't just come out of a Hollywood PR playbook.
No, not.
The source material gives us a vital origin story for Essiedu that contextualizes his resilience, and it stems from a much earlier period in his life.
Long before he ever stepped onto a soundstage, Essiedu attended a private school called Forest School in London. But the mechanism of how he got there is crucial.
Right.
He didn't go there because his family was wealthy. He was there through a specific Tory government policy and assisted places scheme that paid for children from poorer socioeconomic background to attend a high status.
Let's break down the reality of that, Meg. On paper, a scholarship like that looks like a pure meritocratic elevate. A brilliant kid gets access to top-tier education.
Sure, on paper.
But the psychological toll of being the charity case in a room full of generational wealth is immense. Essiedu describes this environment in incredibly stark terms. He calls it a dog-eat-dog world where teenagers would say or do anything to survive the social hierarchy.
It sounds brutal.
He explicitly claims that racism, misogyny, and homophobia were rife at this elite institution, noting that kids are often just unfiltered reflections of the deeply flawed society they're growing.
This Times article actually includes the school's PR response to these claims, which is, standard institutional crisis management.
Right, what did they say?
The school states that they foster a sense of belonging for all pupils, they condemn all forms of racism, misogyny, and homophobia, and that they are continually improving school life. But regardless of the institution's official stance, Essiedu's lived, subjective experience of that environment clearly left a profound, indelible mark on his psychology.
It left such a mark that he specifically cites it as a core reason for taking the Harry Potter role in the first place. He says he didn't just take this decade-long job for the stability and the massive paycheck. I mean, he casually mentions he could have done Star Wars for that.
Which is quite the flex.
It is. He took it because the thematic bedrock of the Harry Potter franchise love, triumphing over hate and finding acceptance as an outsider, resonates on a cellular level with his upbringing and his traumatic experiences at that school.
If we analyze the layers of that, it provides incredible insight into his artistic process. An actor's real-world experiences with class division, with navigating spaces where they feel like a socioeconomic or racial imposter, profoundly inform their choices. Now think about the character of Severus Snape through that exact lens.
Oh, think about the parallel. Snape is the ultimate outsider. He's a character defined by his impoverished, abusive background in Spinner's End.
Exactly.
He arrives at Hogwarts wearing ill-fitting, secondhand clothes, carrying deep-seated grudges, and feeling entirely alienated among the elite, pure-blood wealth of his classmates in Slytherin and the arrogance of James Potter.
It is an incredible thematic resonance. Essiedu bringing his own lived trauma of navigating a hostile, elite British private school to the role of Severus Snape, a character whose entire arc is defined by navigating a hostile, British magical school, adds a layer of gritty, grounded authenticity to the moral complex trying to portray.
It's a brilliant full-circle moment. Hogwarts, for young Essiedu sitting alone in the public library, was pure escapism. It was his coping mechanism to survive the harsh social realities of his actual elite London school.
Right.
And now, as an adult, he is channeling the trauma of the real school to breathe life into the most complex character in the fictional one.
But that deeply held commitment to standing up against what he perceives as systemic injustice, to triumphing over hate, he frames it, leads directly into the second, arguably much larger controversy detailed.
Oh yeah, the big one.
Because this stance pits the newly cast actor directly against the most powerful figure in the entire franchise, the foundational creator herself.
This is where our deep dive takes a sharp turn into one of the most complex, polarizing ideological standoffs in modern society. We're talking about the massive collision of trans rights advocacy and the defense of biological sex categorization, playing out right in the middle of the Harry Potter universe.
The source outlines a major point of contention that ignited just weeks after Essiedu's casting was announced. Essiedu signed an open letter that directly challenged a specific real-world Supreme Court.
What was the decision about?
The legal decision in question stated that the terms woman and sex refer only to biological women and biological sex, respectively.
And by putting his name on this letter in support of trans rights, Essiedu publicly and permanently positioned himself alongside original Harry Potter film actors like Daniel Radcliffe, Emma Watson, and Rupert Grint. And the source notes that this action was widely interpreted by the public as a direct rebuke to J.K. Rowling's well-known, highly publicized, and fiercely defended stances on the immutability of biological sex. As a result of signing this letter, a vocal segment of Rowling's fanbase actually began calling for Essiedu to be fired from the new HBO series before a single frame of footage was even shot.
The interview gives us Essiedu's direct, unvarnished response to this immense pressure. When asked if he sought advice from his PR team or agents before signing the letter, he says no.
Just did it on his own?
Yeah. He states firmly, "My points of views are mine and will continue to be so." He explains the philosophical underpinning of his choice. He signed the letter because he believes that trans artists deserve to be treated with absolute dignity and should be able to exist and work without facing intimidation.
Okay.
He is entirely resolute, stating he would sign the letter again today without hesitation.
He also addresses the calls for his firing head-on. He says that if he were kicked off a job for holding his personal political views regarding human dignity, then it simply wouldn't be a project he'd want to dedicate 10 years of his life to anyway. And he drops a very key logistical detail. He confirms he has never actually met J.K. Rowling.
Now, to understand the full scope of this cultural minefield, we must examine the YouTube commentator's counterview to this situation, which the source presents in stark contrast.
Right, let's look at the other side of the text.
The commentator voices explicit, unwavering support for the biological women argument, referring to the Supreme Court decision regarding sex and gender as basic common sense.
The commentator specifically deconstructs Essiedu's point about intimidation. While Essiedu is deeply concerned about trans artists being intimidated in their workspaces or society at large, the commentator argues from the perspective that biological women can be and are intimidated by the presence of biological men in delineated spaces like locker rooms, bathrooms, and shelters.
It's a fundamental disagreement on vulnerability.
Exactly. Furthermore, the commentator reads a viewer comment that introduces another layer to the rhetoric, suggesting that Essiedu's refusal to listen to or validate a woman's opinion, meaning J.K. Rowling's lived experience and perspective as a woman, is in itself a bit misogynist.
This raises an important question because we are looking at the architecture of a profound, seemingly unbridgeable cultural schism. On one side of the text, we have the actor advocating for the existential dignity, validation, and safety of trans individuals.
Yes.
On the other side, we have the commentator and the creator advocating for the preservation of biological categorizations, which they view as essential for the physical safety and hard-won rights of biological women. These are two competing, deeply held viewpoints rooted in entirely different frameworks of what constitutes vulnerability and safety.
And it raises an incredibly pressing question, maybe the most important logistical and economic question for the business of Hollywood right now.
What's that?
How does a massive multi-billion-dollar intellectual property function when the foundational creator of the world and the newly cast stars of the adaptation hold mutually exclusive, highly publicized, and deeply personal ideological views?
It is an unprecedented dynamic in franchise. Historically, the creator, the studio, and the cast are presented as a unified front, a family bringing a shared vision to life.
Yeah, you do the press tour together, smile for the camera.
Exactly. But here, the intellectual property is caught in a relentless tug-of-war. Warner Bros. And HBO are attempting to build a flagship decade-long franchise on top of an active cultural fault line.
It's like a corporate hostile takeover crossed with a messy divorce.
Yeah.
Imagine you're building a cutting-edge computer. You have this incredible foundational motherboard, the lore, the world building, the genius of the original creation.
Okay, I like this analogy.
But the new operating system you are trying to install the cast, the modern cultural sensibility, is actively rejecting the motherboard. They are fundamentally incompatible in their program. How does the machine run without constantly crashing?
It's a great question.
And more importantly, how does the end user, the audience, enjoy using the computer when they know the hardware and software are at war?
It makes it nearly impossible for the audience to separate the art from the environment surrounding. The pure escapism that young Paapa Essiedu found in those books in the public library is suddenly bogged down by the heaviest, most intractable, real-world political art. Every scene Snape is in won't just be evaluated on the acting, it will be evaluated through the lens of the actor's open letters and the creator's social media.
And yet, despite all of this massive, swirling, deeply political public discourse, the source material does something brilliant. It brings it all back down to the most intimate, human, personal level imaginable for the actor. We move from Supreme Court decisions and algorithmic outrage back to a mother's kitchen.
It is a striking, necessary juxtaposition. The article shares the incredibly heartwarming anecdote about Essiedu's childhood that grounds the whole.
Oh, I love this part.
Right. He was so utterly engrossed in the Harry Potter books as a kid that he would read them incredibly slowly, savoring every. As a result, the food his mother cooked for him after her long shifts would sit there and go cold.
He says she would get so angry. She would think she had done all that cooking and sacrificed her time for nothing while he had his head in a book about wizards.
Typical mom reaction.
Totally. But now, decades later, he says with a laugh that she is incredibly proud. She can finally look at his career, look at this 10-year HBO contract, and say, oh, well, at least something good came out of all that reading.
It is the ultimate personal victory. A child from a tough, disadvantaged background, utilizing free library books to escape his reality, achieves a lifelong dream that entirely validates his mother's struggles and sacrifice.
Beautiful.
It is pure, triumphant humanity. It's the kind of story Hollywood loves to tell about itself.
But then, our source video violently yanks us out of that warm, triumphant kitchen and throws us right back into the digital gladiator arena.
Because of course it does.
Right. The YouTuber ends the video by reading a barrage of comments from their audience, reacting in real time to the interview. And I want you, the listener, to really consider the emotional whiplash of what we are about to describe.
The spectrum of comments read in the video perfectly encapsulates the fragmented, divided reality we've been analyzing today. On one end of the spectrum, you have extreme, unfiltered hostility, comments demanding to kick DEI out, and blunt, definitive rejections like he will never be Snape.
So harsh.
You have deep, cynical skepticism, with commenters accusing him of victimizing himself for PR, or suggesting it's actually good he hasn't met J.K. Rowling so she can't talk sense into him, or cynically arguing he only took the job for the money and the fame, completely disregarding his entire childhood connection to the text.
But then, literally right alongside those comments, scrolling on the exact same screen, there are deeply supportive comments from the exact same audience base.
Really? Like what?
People unequivocally acknowledging that the gender threats are absolutely unacceptable, calling him a brilliant actor based on his previous work, and predicting that he is going to entirely crush it in the role of Snape.
The source synthesizes the extreme, almost schizophrenic duality of the modern entertainment industry perfect. On one side of the ledger, you have the tangible, emotional reality of a son making his mother proud by achieving an artistic pinnacle through sheer talent and perseverance. On the other side of the ledger, you have an anonymous, relentless digital arena that dissects his race, interrogates his personal politics, doubts his psychological resilience, and debates his fundamental right to exist within a fictional world.
YouTube comment section is a perfect microcosm of our culture, right? Think about the mechanics of it. Thousands of people are reacting to the exact same piece of casting news, reading the exact same interview text, yet they are living in completely different realities.
Completely different realities.
They cannot even agree on the basic fundamental facts of why he was hired, let alone how they feel about it.
It perfectly demonstrates that a major casting announcement is no longer just about who is playing a wizard on television. It serves as an immediate, highly combustible catalyst for individuals to litigate their deepest anxieties about society, meritocracy, systemic change, and gender.
The character is just the proxy.
Exactly.
Okay.
The character is just the excuse to have the fight.
Which brings us to the end of this incredibly dense, fascinating journey. Let's briefly recap what we've navigated today, because we have covered a massive amount of ground. We started with what used to be a simple piece of entertainment news, a casting announcement for a TV show, Paapa Essiedu as Severus Snape for the next 10 years.
And from that single point of origin, we immediately found ourselves navigating complex, fiery debates about the philosophy of adaptation, literal visual adherence versus talent blind cast.
Right.
We examined the dark mechanics of social media toxicity, weaponized skepticism, and the modern algorithmic demand for receipts to validate trauma.
Which is so grim.
Very grim. We explored how class struggles and the psychological weight of alienation in elite schools profoundly inform artistic expression. And we waded into the deep ideological battleground of trans rights versus biological sex, observing the unprecedented economic and cultural tension of a franchise where the star and the creator hold diametrically opposed.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? Why should you care about the casting of a fantasy show?
Yeah.
Because it proves that modern pop culture is never just about the media itself anymore. The days of simply watching a show, enjoying the plot, and moving on with your day are largely over.
Yeah, those days are gone.
Every casting choice, every press interview, every open letter, every tweet is a proxy war for broader societal values. You aren't just consuming content, you are navigating a battlefield of competing ideas.
And that reality fundamentally, permanently alters the relationship between the art and the audience. The purity of the original text is now constantly, unavoidably filtered through the deafening noise of the discourse surrounding.
Which leaves us with a final, lingering question to ponder as we wrap up. We talked at the very beginning about how Paapa Essiedu originally used the Harry Potter books from his local public library as pure, unadulterated escapism.
Right.
They were his quiet refuge from a difficult, demanding real world. But given everything we've unpacked today, given how deeply real-world politics, intense cultural wars, and social media toxicity are now embedded into the very fabric of this franchise's production, is it actually possible for art to be escapism anymore?
It's a scary thought.
Or is the canvas we are all staring at no longer a painting to get lost in, but just a mirror, reflecting our most difficult, unresolvable conversations right back at